this video, we're going to cover a ton of stuff that happened at the summit. We're going to look through a lot of the teams that underperformed, and then also a lot of some of the best moments, the most crazy solo clutches in games, and some of the teams that also had a really surprise good finish, and how they did that as well. Of course, we got to start off with the underperformance of Clix and Higs. They ended lower brackets, 47th with 26 points. I'm going to try and not flame them during this video. It will be tough, but I'm sure they've already heard enough of it. So I want to actually just give a full analysis of what actually went wrong here. All right, so of course they're landing Wonky Land, not necessarily uncontested. They've got King and Phaser to the north, but they don't really seem to bother them whatsoever. Of course, they're also able to get to the south side as well, so they were able to get the mini game. So they really actually got the better half of Wonky Land anyway. So splitting it didn't really, I must say, it didn't impact them in this game. It really shouldn't have impacted them at least. All right, so this is the first game, and I wanted to choose this in particular because this is actually a wonky zone. So as you notice, it is a zone that's pulling north, and later on it's going to pull exactly to this area. So this is a game that they should never die to Storm Surge on. Like, this is a game where they just played it terribly, quite frankly. So you can see they basically just play on the wheel. Like, classic way that teams are going to play here from this drop spot. You almost never are going to take any damage, and you're going to have some damage on teams around you. So you can kind of see from this spot, there's not a huge amount of options that they actually have. If I kind of scrub through the game, you'll see once they sit up here, there's not really any teams rotating past this area. The teams who kind of land in this top side here usually will wrap up this direction onto the hill in this kind of zone. So there's not really many people here. There's a bunch of trees here, so it's really hard to get tags. So in these kind of zones, typically teams who land wonky are probably going to get very minimal surge. So what really needs to happen here is that they take 0 damage and that they basically commit a lot of mats on every single rotate after that, because you're probably only going to get 150 to 200 damage from this spot and not be massively above the Storm Surge threshold. And you can kind of see that's exactly what happens. In fact, they actually do play this relatively well. They still get some damage. The little 18 tag, let's go. And breaking down their damage per zone, as you can see here, they get 57 damage in second zone, 38 damage in zone 4, and then 63 in zone 5. However, they take no damage. As you notice, this is all 0. However, they take no damage. 0 damage ratio, or infinite damage ratio, basically means they've not been hit at all. So in zones 0 to 6, they actually play this very, very well, right? 0 damage taken, and they've dealt like just under 200, like 150-ish damage. So you can see Surge pops up currently in the 4th zone, because it's 84 up stacker, and they're 165 above. So they've taken no damage at this point, but they are just above the threshold. They should be fine just to kind of sit here as long as they don't actually end up taking any more. So as I said, they're 150 above, and currently in the 5th zone, all they needed to be was better than minus 68, and in the 8th zone, they needed to be better than 97. So if they took no damage and dealt no damage for the rest of the game, they should have been totally fine on Surge from here. But this next rotate is actually where things kind of really go wrong for them. As you notice, you're already 200 above, coming into the 6th zone. Now, when you see the zone pull like this, there's a couple options that you have if you're Clix and Higs. The reality here is the best spot on this zone is always going to be this hill up to the left. Because they're in wonky and they've been sitting here looking around the whole time, they know there's not that many teams here. Obviously, King and Phaser in, but it's not like there's like 10 teams that are going to stop their rotation in. And plus, this zone is going to open up, which gives them a rotation to get through up onto this hill. They don't necessarily need to commit all the way up to the top because it takes quite a lot of mats to build all the way up. But getting somewhere on this hill here would keep you away from all of these teams who are going to rotate in, but it also puts them on a high layer. Now, it's funny because I was actually sitting with Bloodix watching this match, their coach, and obviously everyone's memeing, saying, what does Bloodix even do? His team's always done it. And in that moment, he was telling me, he was like, I hope they all go up onto this hill. And I completely agree. And watching back the game, I agree even more. But of course, that is not what they decide to do. They decide to overdrive grenade, not the worst rotate in the world, using the wheel here. You could have just flown using the wheel also to go up onto the hill. But they land kind of just, I don't know, they just white line into Storm here, run up the hill, box up, and then they're in this odd kind of spot. It's not the worst spot in the world here, because again, a lot of these teams are going to end up on the south. Like, just here's the zone's about to close. You can see, like, most people are down on the south, and they're still in, like, a pretty good spot. They're away from everyone, so this isn't, like, the worst spot by any means. As you see, then the next zone is going to pull where? To the mountain. Had they positioned themselves on one of these spots, they're giving themselves the best opportunity to actually get the zone, and maybe they'd committed a little bit more mats to get further up the hill, but they're in such a good spot, and even if zone pulls max back, it's not that much different from where they are already had they been over here on this spot. Now they decide to go for an insta rotate, and as you notice, slightly not paying attention, end up in the box and end up dying, getting absolutely max, getting one pumped. And now, unfortunately, because that's just 200 damage gone, and Higgs has also taken damage here, now they're way below. Because, of course, they didn't take much, what was it, 150 damage before, and then they've just insta-lost 250 damage there, so now they're below the Storm Surge. So, again, had they just actually played up on the hill earlier, they would have been fine. So, little bit of a rough rotate. I could keep watching through a lot of the other matches, but honestly, I think they would admit they just didn't really play very well throughout the entire tournament. They didn't make good decisions, didn't play well, didn't rotate well. It was what it was. You know, they've split at this point. I think that's probably for the best, unfortunately. And that was, of course, the lower bracket, but let me jump into the finals now. That's what most people actually care about. Now, the next thing I want to look at is actually Pete and Puyo's first half, because if you look here, and if you watch my main channel video, you'll know in these first 4 games here, they only got 70 points, whereas in these last 4, or there's only 3 visible there at the last 4, I think they got like 300 and, I think it was like 310 or 320. So they played incredibly in the last half, and I'll look at some of the solo clutches later on in this video, but I also want to look at like why did they do so badly in the first 4. So the main thing with Pete and Puyo in the first half, honestly, is that they just kept dying. Like one of them just kept losing in fights, and if you've watched a lot of their kind of div cups from this season and even the major one, I think this isn't going to be quite as surprising. I feel like they've not had the ability to quick did people in the early and mid game quite as much this season. Maybe it's to do with the Chaos Reloader shotgun. I'm not entirely sure because it just hits massive bangs in the way Pete plays. He already takes a lot of damage. This was game number 1 here. They ended up getting fought. HP was back on, but of course you see Pete go down to Iomzo there just with an absolute fat bang, and then Puyo's left to solo clutch. Now, obviously they land up Squibbly Shores, so they did attempt in the first half to W key a lot of the teams around. So later we'll see a game where they W key north to go for Mumsy. This game they W key west to go for Izzy and Nosif. So, you know, they're trying to get that surge out early, and well, we'll see what happens. So firstly, Pete is like way off by himself, gets a nice beam, and then just insta jumps on them. But like these guys are no slouches in the fights whatsoever. And I think one of the reasons it's much more difficult to quick did people obviously is because of the med bomb, right? You have a shotgun which can deal tons of damage. Also, you kind of have this ability to heal whilst holding walls. So, you know, for a guy like Pete who really relies on like constant pressure to like hit on the walls, weaken it with SMG, and like deny you healing, you know, you can kind of cancel all that just by throwing a med bomb down. So I think like their ability to quick dead is just significantly worse this season generally. But Puyo catches up here, like he's kind of stuck in the 1v2, maybe jumped into this a little bit earlier, but Pete handles himself very, very well. Puyo then jumps onto the walls at the side, kind of jumps around. He's got a nice little piece, gets shot from the side from Nosif. He's got the fish to heal because that drop spot's really good. Goes up a layer. Where is it? Wall replaced, bang, trade, and then he's just dead. That then leaves Pete to have to reboot. Obviously, they were worse on Surge here. He just tried to fight them a little bit, but you can see, yet again, they've lost another early game fight. And then in game number 4, I won't show you in VODs because I can't be bothered, but you can just see here, the same thing. They try to fight Mumsy. Someone dies. Yeah, Puyo dies in this fight, I think. Yeah, Puyo dies, and then Pete just like legs it. So they were losing a lot of their mid-game fights. So the adaptation they made in the second half was just not to W key for their Surge, which I think was a very, very smart change, right? You can see they stayed around. They kind of third-partied. So here, for example, they went around to where Nosif and this fight was going on here with Belusi and whatnot. So they were going to get some tags, but they didn't like fully commit to this. They didn't get any damage on this lurk. So you can see they just run back and then just they kind of jump into this fight now, but then run away again. So they're not like full committing to a fight. They're soft fighting here, as it's called, just for a little Surge. And then in the next game, they just literally use like an old classic Surge base. They pull the zone, so they just sit here. And that's kind of how they played most of the games. So they made the adaptation to just stop W keying everyone around them, and instead they started just Surge basing and playing actually to the meta, and had way, way, way more success in that second half. We'll check out Puyo's solo clutches later on and what actually happened, but right now I'm looking more at what went wrong. Another team who struggled a little bit more was Focus and Thomas HD. They placed 12th, obviously a good finish, and top 15 qualified to the Global Championship, so it's not like this was like a bad tournament for them by any means, but most people would predict these guys to be in the top 5, and the top 5 was, 323 points, so they were pretty considerably behind being 12th. Like, a lot of people thought these guys could win, and you can see their match history is kind of all over the place, right? 45th with 0 points. They had a lot of like top 6s. They weren't able to make like a single top 5, so every end game was kind of pants, to be honest. They're relatively consistent there, but they also had a bunch of games that went down. They did kind of spread out quite a lot of eliminations, as you can see here, but honestly, this match history was kind of just all over the place. So historically, their strategy, obviously they land down at Riptides in the south, is to play what's called net zero. So typically their strategy is to kind of control this entire area around here. So if a zone pulls far here, they usually box up around Humble Hills or around these kind of areas, like on this hill here. Any team who's on the south side who tries to rotate past here, they make it incredibly difficult for, because they just have A, insane aim, but B, they've also covered like this entire area. So that's kind of usually the early game strat, at least from like Major 1. So what they did is they usually end up rotating here very early, and then if the storm pulls far, they have to kind of go back, get heals, and then go back again, because they don't want to take too much storm damage, because they want to try and play partials later on. But in this first game, they kind of came across a much bigger problem, which is there's a lot of teams down to the south of them. So you can see here, they've got the boss that spawned on them, and Akira and Kurama have now wrapped all the way around to kind of just third party this fight here. Well, I say the fight fight against the boss. I don't know why they've not popped any big bots, why they do this from 150 HP. They've been focused for 100. So now, you know, from a team who's generally trying to not take any damage early on, they've now just started off with like minus 150 surge or minus 100 surge, and then maybe got 50 back at that point. And now they're stuck into a fight early on as well. So yeah, the fight ends up going on for a long time, and then they end up splitting and leaving, so disengaged from the fight. I think Focus and Thomas probably came out relatively above there. They did a lot of damage to Akira and Kurama actually in the fight. But now, of course, Focus and Thomas has lost their position. They're spending more time in Storm than they'd want to, which means that then they're probably going to get Storm sickness, so they can't play into Storm into the 6th later on. Now, because of that fight, both teams are still in the Storm, as you see here, and Akira and Kurama end up actually lurking on them in this first game. They shock or overdrive grenade, and they end up killing Thomas out the sky, and then both teams fall there. So, you know, the teams around them definitely making them struggle with this Storm strat in game 1. Now, they did adapt to that in the later games. As you can see, in game 2, there was 2 teams landing to the north of them because these two had to dip, and they actually get 3 eliminations in like a matter of like seconds. So they now no longer have to worry about like Akira and Kurama. These guys are also getting fought by Phantom because they're actually like contested down on the south side too here. So in this game, it didn't end up being much of a problem. They could play the Storm, as you see here. Akira and Kurama still a bit of a problem over here, but they can kind of just rotate past them and don't need to worry about that much because they got like a ton of surge early on. And then, you know, they make their usual Storm plays and kind of play out their game as they normally would. So, you know, that 1 0-point game that they got here is probably the difference between them being like top 5 and not. You know, 1 0-point match is a match you could have got 50 points in instead, which, you know, 50 points would have put them into 6th place. And then everyone would have been like, yeah, they played pretty good. So overall, I was speaking to Vico yesterday. He also just said that Focus said to him he IGL'd bad. And you know what? Looking at like some of the placements in the matches and the way that they didn't get that deep into endgame, there probably is definitely like a hint of truth to that. Because, you know, if your fragger doesn't go crazy, I mean, they were getting elims, so like obviously they were fragging pretty good. But, you know, if you're not able to get into any top 5s whatsoever, and you have a lot of these dead games where you're probably down to surge here, I would imagine, not checked every match, there's probably quite a big IGLing problem on that. But it was LAN, you know, it kind of happens, let's be honest. Now, Chino and Pablo is another one. They placed 14, and the biggest thing is, like, I think after maybe the first half, I can't remember where they were in the leaderboard. Let me check, actually. After game 1, they were 3rd. If you scroll through all the leaderboards, coming after game 5, they were in 6th place as well. So they're doing really good. Then they had a, you know, not so great one. They were down to 8th, and then they kind of disappear from the top 10, as you see, and then they weren't in the top 10 at all by the end of the tournament. You can kind of see, like, they had some really good games. A 3rd with 8 elims. This is kind of typical for them. You know, they had a couple stinky 20ths in there, but like these 2 big matches and then just kind of making every endgame with some elims is enough to kind of keep you in that top 5. Again, very similar to the way we talked about Thomas and Focus. These kind of last 2 games, in particular this one, like a 0-pointer, well, yeah, mainly this one, a 0-pointer with our E8. Similarly to Thomas and Focus, this kind of one game where they got a 0-point match is one of the ones that really messed them up, and it's interesting the play they actually made. Now, they probably would have played much better in a lot of these. They were contested off spawn by 2 different teams, so, you know, the fact they had some of these big games was good enough to start with. But here, like, this one was a big stinker, actually. All right, you might wonder, why do I look so distraught, tired, and worn down all of a sudden? Well, that's because I just recorded for 2 hours for this video and muted my microphone halfway through, so I'm gonna have to redo a lot of the video. Luckily, I know what I'm gonna say. All right, so Chino and Pablo, I can't remember what I've said before this. That's who we're talking about right now. They are south of Sandy here. Now, during their major 1, they had the entire thing unconned, but of course they were conned by Mini Puyo and Fukun from Asia, and then Victor V and Canada from NA West. The issue here is that they get no loot. In this south side, there's like 12 chests. And, you know, there's not that many teams around them. Obviously, if they can fight one of these teams off spawn for Surge. But, you know, they do have options generally around them, but they don't have much loot to work with when it comes to actually fighting those teams. So what they do in game number 1, which is their most successful match, they ended up 3rd, is you can see that Canada and Victor V dip west to fight Mini Puyo's team. They both kind of went west over that direction. So what Chino and Pablo do is they third party using the big sprite head here. They use the overdrive grenades, which allows you to fly further on this, double pickaxe it, sprint jump, and then you can see they're just flying towards them. Chino lands straight, hits a bang, bang, 127, very, very nice. Jumps up, double pickaxes in the back, and insta-kills Victor V. Of course, that means Canada is left as a solo. Nice server lag. We love this game. Jumps down onto the walls, basically just kind of sprints straight in. I love the fact he left the little blue circle there. Pickaxe once, ran away, runs back, and then just is able to slide in and get the 2nd elimination. They then run all the way back into Sandy, as you saw. They're back onto this east side now, and buy a bunch of medkits. They get 3 each here. As you can see, Pablo only gets 3, and then Chino also gets 3 too. Now, something I did not know about this big sprite, which apparently they knew, and I think everyone was trying to hide until globals, is that it not only gets angry, as you can make it have a good time as well. So you can see they sit right next to it and double emote, and then it actually turns green. So if I zoom out, you can see he's green. He's very happy here. And this actually heals your white HP. Now, this will probably be gone next season, but I don't think anyone actually knew about... Well, obviously, some people knew about this strat. I didn't know about it. I did a short on this whole thing. So they don't need to waste any medkits. They can literally just sit here and just heal up their HP for as long as possible. Obviously, they don't want to die to sickness, though. I think in order for this actually to activate, you both need to emote at the same time underneath it. I don't think one person emoting is enough. I could be wrong there. Not 100% sure. I haven't gone and tested it myself yet, but every single time it works, there you go. They both emote and then it turns green. I used to rotate past this place the whole time when I'm playing. I can't believe that I didn't know this existed. Then they use one more emote to get themselves healed up. They hit themselves a shockwave and do the same rotate again, where they double hit and then just fly away. I was gonna say they can get some damage at the same time, but here the zone's obviously like pretty far. It's max northwest here, but they can just rotate all the way. And you'll notice that the 5th zone then pulls over to this east. Beautiful for them, so they can come in dead side. And of course, they still have 3 medkits to play out each here, so you know they can sit here, play Storm for as long as they want, and get into the best position. So this is their first game. This was an example of like how everything went well and what happened when they actually executed their game plan. So I think looking at this 38th here, which was their second last game where they got 0 points, is a really good indicator of what can go wrong when this game plan doesn't work. So, you know, if they'd had like a good game again, you know, we assume they got like a 50 point, that would have put them up to like top 7. And I don't think anyone would have said, oh, that was a bad performance. Again, being conned off spawn and placing 14th is still pretty good given the circumstances that they had. But I think it's good to look into a game that just didn't work out. All right, this game, they land to the north and then push Fukun's team, who's in the south side. So slightly different from the game we just watched here. I think they swapped at halftime. But if you notice, they have pretty minimal loot. 22 builds, 19 builds. They've got a couple shields and things. So they start aggressing. They start going for a fight. Pablo gets minus, 50 damage right off the rip. And the spray from Mini Puyo is really good because it drains the very minimal materials that they actually have. He then gets aggressive up onto the walls, starts to get into a little box fight. But ultimately, these guys end up running away, right? They don't want the smoke. I don't know if these guys even have good loot. I've not checked yet. Oh my god, they have absolute pots and pans. They have nothing to work with. So he's trying to take good angles. They're trying to take the fight, trying to get damage early, of course, push them off the drop spot. There's not going to be any loot if they're splitting this already, but Fukun's team, as you notice, hits the old little overdrive grenade and then just runs away with the head, right? I think they get little tags. Now they miss every single bullet, of course. GG. So now they're left with nothing, right? So lurking on the team landing next to them doesn't work. And Kanada and Victor V, like you can't just land on them and do the exact same strat that they just did because they're going to be much more aware, I would hope. So instead what they do is rather than going to the west, they do the exact same thing but up to the north. Now up north, there is a good few teams around here in this area. But you see that this lurk just basically didn't work. They fly all the way up. There's not another team sitting in this area whatsoever. You see that Yapko and Panzer are up above. So they run into this little tunnel here and you see that there's a truck underneath. Now they decide to crouch down here and wait for someone to come past, and they wait here for like 3 minutes. Now if you look at the inventory as they're doing this, 38 builds, 39 builds, and you gotta remember they've got very minimal storm surge damage at the minute as well, so they pretty much have almost nothing to work with. Now worst of all, they do this with no whites in their inventory at all, and they've ended up running all the way into painted because there's 2 teams fighting there. So you'd think, why don't they just go to the vending machine? That's why. It's kind of insane, of course. There's a lot on the vending machine. Where is it? It's like in here. So, getting in there, kind of difficult, of course, and you've got 2 teams fighting as well. So they end up being here with just nothing, and they get absolutely no damage. They get absolutely nothing out of this whatsoever. They pick up a couple bandages. Eventually realize this is an utter waste of time. There's no one around they can get good shots on. So they end up hitting the nade, trying to disengage out of here. Very unsuccessful lurk, but they also take damage as they leave here. Trying to wait for it to happen. I know what happens. I remember. There you go. Little tags each. And remember, they still have no whites, but they use their mobility. They use the overdrive grenades to get themselves back to the old trusty big sprite head here, where they can double emote very close, 7 HP, hit the little double emote, of course, and get themselves back up. Yeah, so obviously this game, they failed to get the lurk on. They then die from surge later on because they've got no damage. Their loadout is totally awful. So obviously being contested off spawn definitely messed up a couple games for them, and they definitely made the most of what they did. They were like top 6 before, what, game 6, I think, or something like that. So like they were doing really, really good. It's just unfortunately the lurks didn't work in the last couple games. Next team to stink it up a little was Cold and Rapid, who placed 18th. Now a lot of people had these in their top 5. I think I did as well. If you look at the match history, it's kind of pants. Of course, you've got like 4 good games, so a 10th, a 4th, a 7th, and a 5th. But also like 4 pretty horrible games in there as well. And I think a lot of the reason for this is actually just their drop spot. Right, so Cold and Rapid land on the east side here, and they really just have like no options for surge whatsoever. So firstly, not cons, like they can get a couple tags onto Vidil, sure. But if you notice, if I fast forward here, they kind of move onto this rock. They have all the mess here that we was talking about earlier already, but they can't really get good tags onto that at all. Then when the zone pulls far, they play medkits into the storm. And then as you notice, they rotate down, and then they get into the really nice position here. Where are they? They're somewhere. Are they still over here? In this 5th zone. Okay, so from here, they've basically dealt almost no... Actually, guess how much damage they've dealt. if you had said 58, you would be correct. Now, they've taken 0 damage, as you see, 0 damage in all of these, but they've dealt 58. The problem here is, if you play this kind of strategy where you're really, really low on damage dealt and 0 damage taken, you run the risk of just having bad RNG. So in this instance here, right, they pull a max distance 6th zone. On this rotate, they will lose damage, and they probably will be on a negative damage ratio. So what I mean by that is the next zone pulls absolutely max, and on a max distance rotate, in this meta, you will take damage. In order for you not to take damage, you have to be the best player ever. Even that, like every single team here who's going to be in a good spot is going to take damage. Maybe outside of Sky and Scroll because they're away from the edge. You might have like one safe rotate in, but they're max distance over here. They played the odds of being in Storm and they're in a good position, and then they pull the max zone. So if you've dealt no damage and then you rip damage as you're going through this rotate, you're just going to be below by the time they get in. All right, so you see that they've positioned themselves in zone. They're only 93 above. So remember, they've only done 58 damage at this point. 98 above, no damage taken. Now 68 above, because of course it's all changing based on who deals damage and who takes damage in the lobby. Then you'll see they'll pull the max distance zone. So what they want to do here is they try to go for an instant rotate, which I think is good. And every single rotate they do, they try to do this as good as possible, because they'll go, they'll build a box, they'll nade, they'll build a box. First nade comes out, immediately Rapid takes damage. Cold, I think, also takes damage as he goes here from shot in the back. No, Rapid takes more. I take it back. Yeah, Cold get hit a little as well. So immediately they're 15 below. So straight off of the rip, they're below. And now Surge is actually active, so they're getting tagged. And all of this is just because they couldn't deal enough damage prior to this. So, you know, it looked like they were above the threshold to start with, but not really. Good damage now to deal it back, but now they're stuck behind everyone else, and they're going to have to rotate yet again. So, you know, this stagger, get some tags, stagger, get some tags is fine. But of course, it means you're the last to rotate now. So now everyone's looking back at you. So when they land here, yeah, they get lobby focused. I do remember that correctly. Doesn't know if they actually took any damage at that point, but the same thing's going to happen again, right? They're doing a good job of like building as they go, you know, using an aid box. They're not like overly open in the rotate here, but yeah, it's not going well. Same thing again. Really nice kill from Cold. Absolutely beautiful here. Because the mini Puyo is only like 70 damage, it didn't really matter that much because, you know, it wasn't that healthy. They're now 339 above, but again, they're still one of the last teams to rotate. So all of these teams are still looking at them now. So they still have to go. Now they start to do a good job, get the body, get the finish in. 400 above. Oh my God, we're chilling so bad. Gets another elim here. But again, Alex was like 10 HP, so they barely get anything. And now Cold gets chunked. And all of a sudden, they're 95 above. Because I think the person who pumped them ended up moving on the leaderboard with them, right? So now they're at 95. So again, not that much above the Surge threshold. They're still the last to rotate. They are literally the only team who needs to move into the Storm here. Look at all the arrows pointing towards them. So being late, having no damage early, basically it's just absolutely messed them up. They go. Takes more damage on rotate here. And, you know, like I said, I think they built this and did this relatively well, but they are just getting absolutely rinsed every single time. Cold, I think, is now split. They do a good job getting up, but now they're only 3 above, and then they pull another max zone. Had they pulled zone here, they would have been totally fine, just with 3 above, but they pull another zone, so they're gonna have to do the exact same thing again. See, they're below. Cold's got to hit those. Couple shots missed on this position, unfortunately. Not a single tag onto focus on Thomas, which is unfortunate. Rapid gets them 3 above, gets an elim onto Scary, but they basically got 3 elims here, and all of them have had like 10 to 50 HP or something. They're now getting looked at, trying to trade a little damage. This is a very questionable rotate, I'll be honest. I don't know why they've just placed a floor, get sprayed by the entire lobby, and then get chopped down. Of course, they're going to lose damage at that point. Rapids somehow didn't get minced on his way here. Cold, I think insta dies. Almost insta dies. He's almost below. He goes down. Rapids a solo. It's just completely over. So again, big problem for them. No damage off spawn whatsoever. I don't know if that was the case in every single game, but of course in this one it was in particular. The drop spot was just generally kind of pants. And most of the teams who did well were not edge map teams, right? You had Darm Demush, Acorn Bolts, and then Ritual and Reet over here. They were cons off spawn, so it's slightly different. And these guys had like the best surge spot of all time from this hill. Darm Demush was just nutty fighters. But the vast majority of the top 10 were not like edge map teams like Cold and Rapid were. So if you look at like Malibuca and Vico, for example, like Frigid Fortress is not an edge map drop. You know, this is obviously this, like I said, this is a good drop. So if they want to rotate early, they can just go. Or if they want to go back and get tags, they have the option to. But all of these teams are like last to rotate every single time. Of course, it's a little bit different for Acorn and Bolts because they're on this massive hill, so people can't farm them for surge. It's really hard to like sneak up and try and kill them. They also have like the big pad to rotate far from. So it's not too bad from them. But you know, if you look at a lot of the other teams who struggle, like Focus and Thomas, who we looked at a little bit earlier as well, you know, as I'm obviously mentioning Rapid and Cold over here, it's nowhere near as bad if you're like these teams to rotate this way rather than being here and trying to rotate, because you know you could be held for surge by these guys, but who are these guys going to hold for surge? You know, there's literally no one on this side behind them, for example. All right, I would say Curve and Veno, let me move my camera, is probably the biggest disappointment, I would say. Probably the biggest upset of the entire tournament. A lot of people had them first, or at least in top 5 as well. And they kind of just stunk it up. Now, unfortunately, they were contested off spawn and kind of surprise contested like 15 minutes before the tournament started. I said in my main channel video already, I spoke to Veno before. He was seeming very, very confident. He thought things were going to go well. He had a little game plan strats cooked up. And then they did an interview at top of show on the broadcast and he looked absolutely demoralized. He looked very like broken, I'll be honest. So I think the mental was really gone from them. I also just think, honestly, I don't think they played that well, just to be completely blunt. In this game, for example, this was game number 2. They 50-50'd in one off spawn. The Brazilians said they were using a macro, which I thought was very funny at the same time. So they got like a little bit of damage here. But then, you know, you can see they rotate around and then they try to like fight like Akira and Kurama in here. You know, I'm just going to skip through. You can see they don't get any elims and dip away. Basically got packed in, lost like 250 surge here and then just died to surge later on. So it looked like their game plan, I mean, obviously, like, I was going to say, they were thrown off by the fact that they were contested, but I think, honestly, the games that they won off spawn, like, this was a straight 50-50 where they got free surge off spawn. They played it pretty poorly out after that as well. I looked through a couple of the matches. I think the easiest way to summarize this is that they just didn't play well, and I think, in all honesty, a lot of that is probably mental, being like, oh, we're conned, just, oh, the whole tournament's gone anyway. You know, we can't land our drop spot, which was north, we have to land south, and now we're conned. Oh, it's not going well. You lose fights to, like, Frenchies and things like that. Probably doesn't bring the spirits up all too high. So I think, honestly, a lot of this is probably just mentality, and they just played some cheeks. All right, that's enough. I did have some solo clutches that I'd recorded in here, but honestly, the stuff I'd talked about was pretty useless. I didn't really provide any value. There are some fun matches. So that's why a lot of the big teams didn't perform all that well. Very, very difficult tournament, of course. Like the video, subscribe. Peace.